All right. Are we live? Are we showing on YouTube? Rumble? Odyssey? Hey, what's up, capitalists? It's your guide to the 21st century, Nate Houseman. And we've got I've got so many articles I want to read. I had to really use my highlighter extension on the browser to pick and choose what I wanted to read. But hey, how's it going? How's the Great Awakening treating you? Let's kind of get into it. The topics of tonight's discussion are going to be, of course, Mar-a-Lago and the 87,000 IRS agents. I mean, those issues aren't going to go away. And we're going to talk about, some of the nonsense going on with Hollywood and the streaming wars. And we're going to wrap it up with some Bitcoin and cryptocurrency news and close it with one article about what Jesus actually said about, how to handle corruption in your organization. So if you find any of this content valuable, hey, you can give me a like, give me a subscription on whatever platform you're watching this on, and you can tip me on Streamlabs, you can tip me on Rumble, and you can tip me on Odyssey if you feel the urge, or you can support me on locals.com. It's a free speech alternative to Patreon and Discord. Join my group and get access to exclusive content. And I'll have some other, opportunities and resources to show you along the way during this stream. But let's get started. This is from BeckerNews.com. It's such a great blog. I don't know how Kyle Becker cranks out so many articles throughout the day because it takes me forever just to type maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs. But the FBI search warrant contains a chilling passage that reveals what the Trump raid was all about. Now, this is Becker's theory. I have my own theory, which I'll get into. We can go into the nitty-gritty about whether, Trump stole classified documents or not, whether he really had the authority to have classified documents in Mar-a-Lago, but there's something else going on. It's something much more basic. But let's read what Becker says. The FBI search warrant has now been made available to the public. It shows that Donald Trump was under investigation for potential obstruction of justice and violations of the Espionage Act. The search warrant lists 3 crimes, which are summarized in import by the legal analyst Technofog. Technofog is another great blog on Substack. The search warrant lists 3 crimes, which are summarized. 18 U.S.C. 793, also called the Espionage Act. This statute prohibits communicating, transmitting, or delivering to any person not entitled to receive it any document, writing. Okay. The second one, this law prohibits 18 U.S.C. number 2071. This law prohibits the removal of any record, proceeding, map, book, paper, document, or other thing filed or deposited with any clerk or officer of any court of the United States or any public office. And the third one, which the statute prohibits the destruction of any record, document, or tangible object with the intent to impede, obstruct, or influence the investigation or proper administration of any matter within the jurisdiction or any department or agency of the United States. As you can imagine, the press is giddy with the allegations the former president violated the Espionage Act. But attachment B shows the investigative scope of both classified and unclassified documents. This is the link on Becker's web blog page. The full, warrant as provided by the magistrate. Attachment B, subsection C, clearly states any government and or presidential records created between January 20th, 2017 and January 20th, 2021. So that's basically the entirety of Trump's first term. Becker says this is a chilling passage because it confirms without a doubt that the FBI was undertaking a phishing expedition. As Federalist CEO and co-founder Sean Davis noted, under Attachment B of the FBI raid document, Garland demanded the seizure of virtually any record Trump ever saw, read, or created over the entire 4-year first term of his presidency. Any government and or presidential records created between January 20th, 2017 and January 20th, 2021. Under Attachment B of the FBI raid document, Merrick Garland, the supposed Attorney General, demanded the seizure of literally any record Trump ever saw, read, or created over the entire first year term of his presidency, Davis notes. Any government and or presidential records created between those dates. Whether the FBI raid was a mop-up job because the feds are terrified that Trump might reveal damning information about their unlawful operations, such as Crossfire Hurricane remains to be seen. It's difficult to know at this stage who is setting a trap for whom. So Crossfire Hurricane, if you remember, was the Fast and Furious was the gun running operation that Obama oversaw, but Crossfire Hurricane was the so-called Russian collusion investigation. On Friday, former Trump national security official Kash Patel revealed in a Fox News interview some very interesting information involving the Government Services Administration, or GSA. He says, okay, I'm going to read the whole thing that Kash Patel said. Yeah, so the normal process, and I was the deputy, there's multiple occasions, but I think I was serving as Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Patel replied. If we need to declassify through the normal chain of command for lower level employees, we'd have to go through a rigorous process to do that procedurally. But the President of the United States is, and always has been, the ultimate unilateral classification authority to classify and declassify. If he says something is declassified, that's it. Then it's declassified. He issued a strong statement in October of 2020 to classify all Russiagate and all Hillary Clinton documents. And that's up on, publicly available, he added. And then, at the end of his administration, in December and January, he felt so much more information needed to be classified. He declassified whole sets of documents that should have come out. Now, the GSA has since come out, the Government Services Administration. They mistakenly packed some boxes and moved them to Mar-a-Lago. That's not on the president. That's on the National Archives to sort that material out, he added. They cannot prosecute him for intentionally, even if it was classified, which is highly unlikely that they issued these sweeping orders like we went through with the Hillary Clinton saga. They'll never meet the burden of intent because the president didn't back it up and take it himself. The GSA has said they did it and they made a mistake, he added. And that should have really been the end of it. It should have been a cordial subpoena where at most they'd said, okay, we just need this and we'll get the rest back to you. President Obama and President Clinton still have classified materials in their possession in their home, but they have not released to this day per the National Archive. Kash Patel here states unequivocally that Donald Trump has ultimate declassification authority. It appears that this statement is on firm legal footing, as the Article 3 Project's Mike Davis points out. Again, the classification statutes and regulations do not apply to the President of the United States. He has the inherent constitutional power, as Commander-in-Chief, to classify and declassify anything he wants, in any manner he wants. The Supreme Court reaffirmed this in 1987. The relevant case here is Department of Navy versus Egan, and I won't read the whole thing, but the article basically concludes, the FBI raid on a former U.S. president will prove to be a turning point in American history, if once again there is no justice for those involved in the case. Now, they're pretty much, Becker explains that Donald Trump didn't hide classified documents because he, as the president, could declassify and classify anything he wanted, and he did, cooperate with other authorities on those documents. What was the purpose of the raid? It was either intimidation or the deep state is trying to provoke, regular Americans into doing something irrational and dangerous. This article from The Hill spills the beans. Pro-Trump backlash to FBI search fuels concern over political violence. Now, concern by whom? Concern of whom? It's not going to be Trump supporters who are going to be violent. I'm going to say that up front. But the deep state, they desperately want a shooting war. They want violence. Now, there's other ways we can free ourselves from corruption besides, taking up arms. That's only the very last resort. But what we're doing right now is we're picking apart the deep state's corruption. We're exposing just how rotten they are. I mean, this FBI raid is part of it. Trump is baiting the deep state, the swamp creatures, into revealing more and more of their, misdeeds. This article by The Hill says the stunning FBI search of rightful President Trump's Florida residence last week, has inspired fierce backlash on the right, feeling concern among experts about the escalating risk of political violence. That's what the deep state wants us to think. But we gotta consider that these people are like narcissists, psychopaths. These people are like genetically and psychologically evil. So we actually need to see what narcissists do when they want to goad us into doing something that we wouldn't. If you've ever been in an abusive relationship with a narcissist, maybe in your family or in your workplace or in your neighborhood, you ought to recognize the pattern of abuse that's happening in the deep state among the permanent political class. This article from unfiltered.net kind of explains how narcissists and psychopaths bait their abuse victims. Imagine that a victim of narcissistic abuse has learned enough about narcissism to be able to identify narcissistic patterns in their relationship. Being able to identify narcissistic behavior enables them to use the techniques we outlined in Living with a Narcissist in this book here, like gray rock and setting boundaries. Gray rock is when you just don't give them any emotional reaction. You just say, how was your day? It was fine, so on. And boundaries is when you basically cut them out and say, hey, you're not allowed to go here. Using these techniques means that they aren't providing any type of narcissistic supply, which is significant because for a narcissist, narcissistic supply enables them to have power and a sense of control, which is essential to their well-being. As they begin to lose their tyrannical control over their victim, they'll begin to use manipulative tactics like baiting in a frantic attempt to draw their victim back into the abusive cycle. Baiting is a manipulative tactic that a narcissist will use to incite a confrontation with their victim. Baiting is one of many manipulative tactics the narcissists use to exploit their victims. The narcissist's ability to address their own emotions causes them to lash out at others, which manifests in psychological and physical violence. So, then, there are many different ways a narcissist could bait their victims. Baiting is nothing more than a narcissist searching for a reaction. So it can look like pushing the victim's buttons, exploiting their insecurities and vulnerabilities, making wild accusations, passive-aggressive behavior, or even targeting those close to their victim. So yeah, the narcissists, the American people are in an abusive relationship with their government. Narcissists and psychopaths have taken over, have usurped the power in the government, and are treating the American people like crap. We just gotta recognize it. Like I said, we're gonna go over some ways that we can fight, this system and basically chip away at their power. But we cannot play their game. We gotta fight them on our own terms, not theirs. So just don't do anything violent. And if there is any violence, just know that it's not really Trump supporters. How do we know that? Well, we've seen it before. This is an article from Washington Times. FBI warns threats of civil war, dirty bomb following Trump raid. This was the FBI is warning calls for civil war and a dirty bomb threat against its D.C. headquarters following its raid on former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. In a linked bulletin, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security said they've seen an increase in violent threats against law enforcement, government officials, and judges in the week since the agents executed a search warrant at Trump's residence. The bulletin warned of talk to place a dirty bomb in front of FBI headquarters and general calls for a civil war and armed rebellion. Investigators are also monitoring threats against the federal judge who approved the warrant to search Trump's residence. And are they doing anything about the protesters at the Supreme Court Justice's house over Roe v. Wade? See, part of this political analysis is just calling out double standards. And we've seen before that the FBI can totally pose as patriots and try to stir up trouble. Confirmed, at least 20 undercover FBI and ATF agents were embedded at the Capitol on January 6th, along with several undercover Capitol Police agents. So I will never believe that it was Trump supporters who stormed the Capitol and started shit. I mean, when I saw a picture of one of those rioters carrying a Confederate flag, I knew it was bogus because Trump supporters hate slavery, they hate racism, and they understand that any projection by the left is just a reflection on the left's own bigotry. As Gateway Pundit reported months ago, Jeremy Brown refused to be an informant for the FBI on January 6th. They wanted him to be one of their operatives at the January 6th Trump rallies. According to an earlier Gateway Pundit report, the FBI called Jeremy's cell phone and asked for a meeting after trying to contact him at his house. Jeremy then met with the FBI agents at a restaurant in Ybor City in December. He told Brandon Gray that 30 seconds into the interview, the FBI attempted to recruit him to spy on the Oath Keepers. Jeremy refused to be an FBI informant, so they stormed his home and arrested him on bogus misdemeanor charges months after the January 6th protests. On Thursday afternoon, September 30th, at 3:45 p.m. Eastern, the FBI raided Jeremy Brown's home, and arrested Jeremy. Their charge is trespassing. The FBI sent 20 vehicles for his arrest. Department of Homeland Security and Pinellas County law enforcement were also present. The FBI was in Jeremy's home for 5.5 hours looking for evidence. Jeremy Brown is still in jail in Florida on a misdemeanor charge. It appears likely that the government is holding him as a political prisoner for not working with the FBI as an operative on January 6th. The FBI finally admitted last September to the New York Times they were running informants and operatives inside groups attending the January 6th rallies in Washington, D.C. In fact, one of the first protesters inside the U.S. Capitol was an FBI informant. What a surprise. There's also evidence that the U.S. Capitol Police were also running informants and operatives inside the Trump crowd, including members who entered the U.S. Capitol with the protesters. Now we learned that at least 20 assets of the FBI and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives were embedded in the crowds at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. And I think I'm going to link to this article on my website when I post this on there, because I want you to read this article for yourself and follow the links, because it's obvious they're trying to bait the American people. And should we expect a fair trial? Well, not necessarily. If you are caught up in this sort of thing, just know that the judge who signed off on the sketchy FBI search warrant is a client named on Ghislaine Maxwell's little black book. Is he or isn't he? Well, he's got a connection. So just think, how many other judges out there are also being blackmailed by the deep state? How many others might have dirt on them or a blackmail file on them? I mentioned this a few weeks ago. Maybe the CCP has spies. We know that the Communist Chinese Party has spies embedded in all sorts of Western governments. The U.S., Britain, Australia, in both their governments and their corporations. So who's to say there's some shit? There's the justice system's on the up and up. We've got to very carefully neutralize these threats, and we're doing it by exposing them and cutting off their money supply. That's what we're going to talk about with Bitcoin in a little bit here. But the people are with President Trump, the rightful president. This is from the Gateway Pundit. Trump announces that he has that he has his best poll numbers ever and largest amount of campaign contributions from people ever this past week. Now, this is just Trump saying it. We don't have any outside confirmation, but we do know that political candidates have their own internal polls that are much more accurate than the media polls that are given to the public. So he personally knows whether the people are with him or against him, and he knows himself. So President Trump shared some great news today. I'm just going to read what the article says. And Trump says on his website, just received the strongest poll numbers I have ever gotten and the largest amount of campaign contributions from the people. The public gets the scam, but this time much earlier than all the others. The others probably being the corporate media. So, like I said, part of Trump's appeal, and I didn't like Trump at first when he first ran. He won me over when he called out the media to their faces. He won me over when it was obvious that the media and the corporations, they were out to get him. His appeal lies in the fact that it's him against an establishment. And what he's doing right now is, by supposedly stepping away from the presidency, he has formed boundaries with the narcissists, and he's setting up conditions where the narcissists expose themselves. That's one powerful tactic in exposing a narcissist and exposing their abuse. So they're only lashing out because they're getting desperate. They're losing control. So let me see if I have any super chats. Probably not, but we'll just have a look here. All right. Moving on, I want to mention one of my resources for you to if you want to support the channel and make waves yourself. You can go to my website, natehouseman.net, and click on the shop page, and I've got a bunch of merch for you. As soon as the page loads up, I'll show you. So many of my favorite streamers and YouTubers and content creators are selling coffee. Geek Grind Coffee by Nerdrotic, Coffee Brand Coffee by The Quartering. Well, I don't have any coffee, but you're going to need mugs to drink that coffee. So I've got some with some cool slogans on here. And you can help yourself to them just by going to my website and clicking on the shop button. I also have some t-shirts and hats to offer you. And moving on, we also got to talk about the IRS and the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, because everyone sees through this. This is from theDailySignal.com. Tax audits for middle-class Americans would skyrocket with final passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, predicts a congressman who focuses on the federal budget and helps craft the Trump tax cuts. Representative Kevin Brady, Republican from Texas, ranking member of the House Ways and Means Committee, says he expects a huge surge in tax audits by the Internal Revenue Service as a result of the Democrats' bill, which passed through the Senate on Sunday after so-called Vice President Kamala Harris cast a tie-breaking vote. The spending plan would allocate $80 billion for the IRS, over 6 times the agency's current budget. Much of this money would pay for 87,000 new IRS agents to enforce the tax code. Brady argued that the Inflation Reduction Act would hit made-in-America businesses, small businesses, and workers who always bear the brunt of higher taxes. Brady cited a Congressional Budget Office analysis showing the IRS audit rates would increase for all taxpayers. The analysis from the Independent Budget Office estimated that IRS revenue would increase by $200 billion over the next decade. Now, they really are out to get small businesses, and that's because they openly prefer huge, big multinational corporations. These big corporations are really the government's proxies, and they are, these corporations are, funded, and they get capital from the stock market. The stock market is basically run by the banks and big institutions. Now, one of the ways I know this is because I do a little day trading, and I don't really have enough capital to do day trading full time to make a full time living at it. But I've got a pretty good, win rate, and that's because I follow what the banks do. I follow a strategy where I follow the Wyckoff distribution pattern in the charts, and I follow these supply and demand zones, which are indications of when the banks make some big moves in the markets, and that's one of the most surefire ways of actually following the markets, because really it's the banks that control what the markets do because they have so much money. The banks really decide which corporations succeed and fail. So they really can decide, whether a company is, going to have enough money to whether survive, whether or not they're profitable. Amazon is very seldom profitable, but it's able to chug along because it's got so much investor capital. Same with a lot of other tech companies like Facebook, or Apple is actually very profitable, but that's they also have a lot of investor capital. But so many of these companies, they don't really depend on profits to survive. They depend on capital. Now corporations, they're able to publicly trade on the stock market. Small businesses tend to take out loans from banks, so they're always on the hook and trying to pay off their debt. Now, Stuart Varney on Fox Business has said small businesses would bear the brunt of enforcement efforts from the Internal Revenue Service. I think the IRS has been weaponized, Stuart Varney told Fox and Friends host Steve Doocy while discussing legislation passed by the Senate last Sunday that included an expansion of the IRS. $80 billion, 87,000 new agents, that is the weaponization of an institution. What are they going to do with this power they're about to acquire, this extra power? He says, I think they're going to go after middle America, specifically small business, Varney continued. In 2021, 9 million people earned $200,000 to $1 million. Only 40,000 were audited. Many of those people were in small business. The Democrats think that's a conservative group. The IRS will go after small business. There will be more audits, more penetration of small businesses, putting them back on the block there to answer for their earnings. The IRS is under fire over a leak of taxpayer information involving some of the richest Americans to ProPublica, a left-wing media outlet, in 2021. A similar leak in 2013 involved conservative organizations. So the agency has also faced allegations that it targeted Tea Party groups during the Obama administration. Lois Lerner, the central figure in the scandal, was not charged with any crimes. So we're in for some rough rides here. But I still support small businesses. I still want to serve small businesses as a web designer, as a digital marketer. But just know that it's going to get a little worse before it gets better, but it's going to get better. We're going to, like I said, we're still exposing these crooks, and the only reason they control us is because we use their money, which is why it's so important to move your money into things like sound currency like gold and silver and Bitcoin. So, another attack on small businesses is a looming change in worker classification rules, which will cost small businesses big bucks. This is from thehill.com. A lot of attention has been paid to the tax increases that are part of the Democrat-backed Inflation Reduction Act that's making its way through Congress. And while these increases are concerning to both businesses and taxpayers, there's another rule coming from the Biden administration that will have an even bigger impact on costs for millions of small businesses. a looming change in worker classification rules. The new rules will result in a changing status of countless independent contractors to employees. Why is that such a big deal? Independent contractors are freelancers and temp workers. Small businesses rely on independent contractors to perform ad hoc and infrequent tasks that usually do not require the attention of full-time employees, often called 1099 workers, thanks to the tax form that needs to be filled with the IRS to report payments over $600. These freelancers, or gig workers, are standalone entrepreneurs who oftentimes serve multiple customers. They're truck drivers, software developers, project managers, construction workers, content producers, healthcare professionals, counselors, and trainers. They're also consultants, web designers, Uber drivers, DoorDash drivers. They belong to professional organizations that support freelancers. Along with millions of others, they get projects and side gigs through platforms such as Fiverr, Craigslist, Upwork, and Freelancer.com. Most of these entrepreneurs operate independently as small business owners themselves and earn their entire livelihoods this way. Others enjoy the extra income these freelancing opportunities provide. The Department of Labor's new rules will throw away the multiple requirements that have long been used to determine whether a freelancer is truly independent or should be classified as an employee and replace those requirements with a more simplified ABC test. These new rules focus on just 3 factors. The worker is free from the control and direction of the hirer in connection with the performance of the work. That's part A. Part B, the worker performs work that is outside the usual course of the hiring entity's business. And C, the worker is customarily engaged in an independently established trade, occupation, or business. For small businesses, the biggest challenge will be meeting the B rule. That's because, in essence, that specific test basically says that a small business owner cannot use a 1099 worker to perform tasks that generate revenue for their business. The work must be outside the usual course of what their company does. So, if he's going to charge his client for the services performed by the outside developers and tax experts he uses, then he can't treat these outsiders as independent contractors. Instead, he must classify these workers as employees. And that's a big problem for small businesses. Why? Because of the big tax increase. Not only will small business owners have to withhold payroll taxes for these workers, but they'll also need to pay for the employer's portion of both Social Security and Medicare taxes, as well as any related state and local taxes. As employees, they may be qualified to participate in the company's benefit plans, which would incur further health insurance and retirement costs. We told the Labor Department that we want these attacks on our small businesses to stop, says Karen Warren, co-leader of Fight for Freelancers USA. There are 59 million independent contractors in this country. We're a third of the U.S. workforce, and the majority of us are happy. Lawmakers and regulators need to stop their outrageous attempts to misclassify us as employees. The bill would end my ability to be my own boss, to set my own hours, and otherwise live the American worker's dream, wrote Judy Kettler on NBCNews.com. According to the ABC test, businesses need to treat someone like me as an employee, with all the rights and benefits that entails, even if I'm writing only a single story for them. Ditto for all types of creatives who support themselves through gigs, like actors, artists, and musicians. How many companies will continue to use our services under these circumstances? It's simply not feasible. So, and the article ends. It's inevitable that freelancer organizations and other business groups will challenge the ruling in court. There are already many legal challenges, and it's important to note that the ruling is coming from the Department of Labor and does not impact how the IRS, a separate agency, defines independent contractors for tax filing purposes. So, confusion and chaos are also inevitable. In the meantime, countless small business owners will be stuck in the middle. Amid inflation, supply chain problems, labor shortages, and a continued economic slowdown, these changes cannot be coming at a worse time. And the author of this article is Gene Marks, the founder of the Marks Group, a small business consulting firm. He frequently appears on CNBC, Fox Business, and MSNBC. So Gene Marks is sounding the alarm. And a little bit of good news before we move on to the next, part of the stream. Exclusive. Missouri Attorney General sends letter to the IRS demanding army of new agents to back off. This is from thefederalist.com. On Sunday, this would be last Sunday, so it would have been the August 7th, Senate Democrats passed their latest colossal spending bill, which authorizes the IRS to hire 87,000 new agents. Missouri Attorney General and Republican Senate candidate Eric Schmidt sent a letter to the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service Wednesday, demanding that the agency back off plans to hire an army of potentially militarized agents. The people of Missouri love our country, Schmidt wrote, but with every passing day, we find more reasons to fear our government. On Sunday, Senate Democrats passed their latest colossal spending bill. To put this in perspective, Schmidt wrote, the IRS will be larger than the FBI, the Pentagon, the State Department, and the Border Patrol combined. These 87,000 agents are expected to conduct more than 1 million new audits, which will affect Missourians of all income levels. The thought of 87,000 new IRS agents terrorizing Missourians is disturbing to say the least. The main role of the federal government is to protect our borders and provide security to our citizens against foreign threats, not to find new ways to extract more hard-earned money from the people of this great nation. In his letter to Commissioner Rettig Thursday, Schmidt took particular issue with the one since deleted agency job posting, where applicants to the auditor's jobs should be prepared to carry a firearm and be willing to use deadly force. Even more troubling is the militarization of the IRS, Schmidt wrote, highlighting the Revenue Service's possession of more than 5 million rounds of ammunition to use in its rifles, shotguns, pistols, and some machine guns. No tax collection agency needs such firepower. Schmidt pointed to the 2013 tax scandal when the IRS was caught applying undue scrutiny to conservative groups under disgraced ex-director of exempt organizations unit Lois Lerner. We still remember clearly how the IRS under Lois Lerner abused its power against political opponents of the last Democratic administration, Schmidt wrote. Adding the Biden White House has only escalated its political warfare with an FBI raid of rightful President Donald Trump on Monday. The real message sent by the federal government to the people of this country, to the actions of its agents in the FBI, the Department of Justice, and increasingly militarized IRS is crystal clear, Schmidt added. The regime is in control and will investigate and punish anyone who stands in its way. That's the unifying theory between the Mar-a-Lago raid and this new IRS Inflation Reduction Act mess. The purpose is not to get after lawbreakers. The purpose is to intimidate the people, intimidate, honest politicians who want to truly serve their country, and to instigate and rile up, and hopefully cause violence. We're not going to fall for it. We're not going to fall victim to it. We're going to carefully and legally root out these criminals. Part of that is going to depend on fair elections, and Kerry Lake showed us the way. Like I said in my last stream, Kerry Lake in Arizona in the primary for the Republican nomination for governor, Kerry Lake gave the deep state the scare of their lives because they tried to steal that election, but she won through the sheer power of support she had from the regular people. The people voted for her overwhelmingly, and they overwhelmed the cheating system. We need to do that throughout the country. Really, this is just a reaction to her victory and her showing us the way. So, and once, we get some real patriots, we get the people's real choices into Congress and in other levels of government, then we'll be able to clean out things like the IRS, the FBI, the Federal Reserve. Then we'll have some people who will actually stand up for us. Now, this Missouri, Attorney General who's running for Senate, this is a very good sign. If, the federal government, goes wait around too much, we still have the states to stick up for us. Now, depending on what state you're living in, you might live in a Democrat hellhole. You might live in a free Republican state. It's going to be the states that, can also counteract the corruption in another level of government. I've been saying since really 2020 The Republicans in DC are pretty useless. They're in league with the Democrats, but I'm being really impressed by the Republicans at the state and local level. Now, there are some bad Republicans in the state level, like in Georgia and the establishment in Arizona, but they're at least a little more, open to reform. Democrats are just completely corrupt. I think the only good Democrat in the entire country is probably Tulsi Gabbard. And that's not even a liberal versus conservative issue. True liberalism and true liberals and true conservatives ought to be friends. They are both people, both groups are people with valid viewpoints. They can work together. The real problem is politicians and talking heads, values, and just, misrepresent their enemies and they misrepresent themselves and use political values. They use ideological values as a smokescreen and as a disguise to commit crimes under their ulterior motives. So, thankfully, with the internet, we can watch them. We have a lot more access to them. So, pay attention. Now, like I said, it's gonna be rough for the next few months, but we are gonna once we do get some legit public servants in office, we're gonna clean house. And in the meantime, we do need to bolster up our small businesses and our freelancers. And god damn it, why isn't this working? I want to show you what the service I want to offer to small businesses, and that's my marketing service. So click on the link to either my personal blog, natehouseman.net, or my business website, ziphoswebmarketing.com, and avail yourself of my digital marketing services. So this is really irritating. Here I am, a web designer, and my website's not working. Do I have the connection here? We'll move on. But I do want to support small businesses, and for just a small, monthly fee, I can get you ranking higher. I can get you better reviews on all sorts of review platforms, build up your reputation, and improve your word of mouth. So please take advantage. Now, I'm not going to talk about Twitter there. I'm going to save that for maybe the Elon Musk and Twitter trial that's going to happen in October. But here's an article I'm going to read in full. This is from Human Events. Have you heard about Taylor Lorenz? She's a so-called journalist, a mainstream media journalist, a corporate journalist who's been acting just horrendously. She's been doxing people. She's been doxing her political opponents. She's been spouting crap. But her time is coming to an end here. Libby Emmons writes, new COVID guidelines put an end to the entitled ethos of Taylor Lorenz. The CDC has finally relaxed the COVID restrictions that many Americans already knew were useless, that of quarantining those who have been exposed to the virus. The new guidance lifts the requirements to quarantine if exposed to the virus, de-emphasizes screening people with no symptoms, and updates COVID-19 protocols in schools. NPR writes, yet for some, like noted cry bully Taylor Lorenz, these changes are intended to hurt people like her. Literally, what's the plan for high-risk, medically vulnerable, and disabled people, she writes on Twitter. Just let us die while the world marches on? Like, WTF. Lorenz, who has come to symbolize the kind of whiny, entitled millennial that demands more of society than she would ever allow anyone to expect of herself, can't bear to have the freedoms of others supersede her own, needs to restrict them. There is an ethos among Americans of a certain overeducated class, among those who feel their mere existence is permission to dictate terms of behavior to the rest of society. It is this group that reveled in the COVID restrictions, that has used masking and quarantining as a moral cudgel with which to beat the rest of us, to call us grandma killers, and claim that we just don't care about others. There are many among the elite media class of millennials who advocated during the early months of the pandemic to never leave their own homes, to give in to their inner desire to not see anyone anyway, to live their entire lives online, telling others to do what to do while they breathed filtered air, consumed delivered meals, and ordered all their supplies from Amazon. For her part, Lorenz laments that the US never had full lockdowns. In her view, those people who are concerned about the impacts of isolation, school and church closures, economic shutdowns, are literally forcing the disabled to stay locked away forever. The same people complaining nonstop about the mental health costs of lockdowns, she writes, even though we never had full lockdowns, and having to wear masks, are perfectly happy to force disabled people to stay locked away forever or keep an N95 glued to their face every time they step into public. Instead of giving Americans back their right to show their own faces, to not take medical precautions when they don't believe they are necessary, or even when the CDC doesn't believe they are necessary, Lorenz and those who agree with her want everyone to cater to her own concerns. This is not about masks. This is not about support for the disabled. It's about wanting to force others to treat you in a certain, very specific way, even to the detriment of their own preferences and freedoms, and feeling entitled enough to demand it. She's a narcissist. These are people who are psychologically and genetically incapable of empathy and really, understanding and serving other people, caring about other people or caring about other people's needs. They hate that people might have lives of their own. They demand control. She says, even if you wear an N95 everywhere, one-way masking policies leave vulnerable people at risk, she writes. Say there's a tiny gap in your mask. You have to remove your mask at airport security or take a sip of water, to say nothing of the countless other mitigation measures our leaders have ignored. She implores officials, experts, to require that the public do what she wants them to do. And this is not a proclivity specific to Lorenz, though she embodies it perfectly. Prior to the pandemic, plenty of other contagious illnesses were part of our daily lives. Yet most people did not feel a need to mask either for their own benefit or for the benefit of others. But instead of remembering a mere few years back, Lorenz lashes out at those who do not wish to mask, and for the CDC for stating that exposure to COVID should not require that exposed person to hole up at home for 2 weeks on the chance that they contracted the virus. Disabled, medically vulnerable people should not have to risk their lives to participate in society. Not are most even given that choice. Disabled people also have to work, go to school, grocery shop, go to the doctor's office. We're human beings in the world just like everyone else. And of course, the final missive in Lorenz's diatribe has nothing to do with wanting there to be more people who think like her in the media in order to pump up her view and center those views over others. If only there were more people, Lorenz believes, who are aware of how hard it is to be someone like her, there'd be more concessions made to her and those who agree with her. As someone working in media who's immunocompromised and medically vulnerable, I really wish there was that we as an industry hired more disabled writers and did more to center vulnerable people in our coverage, especially on COVID. What's happening right now is so horrific on such a massive scale, she writes. The only thing that is horrific is the ongoing capitulation to crybullies who demand all the concessions, entitlements, and privileges while telling the rest of us we are inconsiderate for not considering them first. If anything, the CDC's new guidance has finally caught up with the rest of America. People can no longer be convinced they need to stay inside while not sick for 2 weeks, or more simply, on the off chance they have a cold. For the past few years of this pandemic, we've been bullied and harangued by people who cry out how much more important their lives and lifestyles are than everyone else's. And hopefully, finally, people are realizing that they can think, live on their own terms. So there is a movement. There is movement back towards liberty. So this is good news. So I want to read this article. Not just social media, cable news has a bigger effect on polarization. I mean, who watches cable news anymore other than boomers? I'm going to read it. Did I highlight anything on it? I'll just read the first few paragraphs. The past two election cycles have seen an explosion of attention given to echo chambers or communities where a narrow set of views makes people less likely to challenge their own opinions. Much of this concern has focused on the rise of social media, which has radically transformed the information ecosystem. However, when scientists investigated social media echo chambers, they found surprisingly little evidence of them on a large scale, or at least not on a scale large enough to warrant the growing concerns. And yet, selective exposure to news does increase polarization. This suggested that these studies missed part of the picture of America's news consumption patterns. Crucially, they did not factor in a major component of the average American's experience of news: television. To fill this gap, the author and a group of researchers from Stanford University, the University of Pennsylvania, and Microsoft Research tracked the TV news consumption habits of tens of thousands of American adults each month from 2016 through 2019. We discovered four aspects of news consumption that, when taken together, paint an unsettling picture of the TV news ecosystem. SIP. We first measured just how politically siloed American news consumers really are across TV and the web. Averaging over the 4 years of our observations, we found that roughly 17% of Americans are politically polarized, 8.7% to the left and 8.4% to the right, based on their TV news consumption. That's 3 to 4 times higher than the average percentage of Americans polarized by online news. Moreover, the percentage of Americans polarized by TV ranged as high as 23% at its peak in November 2016, the month in which Donald Trump was elected president. A second spike occurred in the months leading to December 2018, following the blue wave midterm elections, in which a record number of Democrat campaign ads were aired on TV. The timing of these two spikes suggests a clear connection between content choices and events in the political arena. Besides being more politically siloed on average, our research found that TV news consumers are much more likely than web consumers to maintain the same partisan news diets over time. After 6 months, left-leaning TV audiences are 10 times more likely to remain segregated than left-leaning online audiences, and right-leaning audiences are 4.5 times more likely than their online counterparts. While these figures may seem intimidating, it's important to keep in mind that even among TV viewers, about 70% of right-leaning viewers and 80% of left-leaning viewers do switch their news diets within 6 months. To the extent that long-lasting echo chambers do exist, then they include only about 4% of the population. So that's that. So it basically it is actually healthier to get your news from the internet than it is from TV. Speaking of TV, let's look at some of the streaming wars nonsense. Disney Plus, with ads, sets U.S. launch date and pricing fee hike for premium service. So, Disney had their earnings call last week, and they talked with their stockholders, mostly from big banks like J.P. Morgan, and they didn't talk much about movies. They talked more about sports, ESPN, and the theme parks, because those are the big money makers for the company. So whether or not we're going to see actual quality content from them that's not woke or overly political, that's actually not the shareholders' biggest concern. The biggest concern is things like the theme parks. But Disney on, August 10th, raised the curtain on its highly anticipated ad-supported streaming plans, announcing new tiers and pricing led by Disney Plus, with advertising a subscription offer that will be available in the U.S. on December 8th for $7.99 a month. There will be no ads in kids and preschool programming. The Disney Plus Premium no ads plans currently is $7.99 a month or $79.99 per year, and will change to $10.99 a month or $109.99 a year on December 8th. So Disney is not making as much money from Disney Plus and other streaming services as they initially planned. So they have to include advertising. And that, is opening up a whole new area it's not kind of bringing it back to linear television, just that more of their content's going to be on demand. So The week before Disney had their earnings call, uh, Warner Brothers Discovery had their earnings call, and Warner Discovery CEO David Zaslav kind of said, not in so many words, but they kind of need to go back to an old system of releasing movies in theaters and licensing movies to TV and other distributors so they can make more money. Because there's actually a lot less money in running a streaming service. They actually have to go back to an old way to make more money. And whether or not that's going to happen with the internet remains to be seen, but someone has woken up to the fact that Hollywood cannot exist as it currently is. But coming back to this Disney story, the news comes on the cusp of Disney's latest quarterly earnings today and amid a sentiment shift on streaming. Wall Street and big media are scrutinizing the sector's costs, growth prospects, and potential profits much more closely. Advertising lets Disney offer more options and price points, which is becoming especially relevant in complicated economic times like now, with inflation soaring and a recession looming. And ad revenue can help defray the high cost of content spend. As streaming wars rage, and it's not clear how many services will ultimately be left standing, although Disney is considered to be a pretty sure bet. Advertisers have in fact been clamoring to get in on Disney Plus from day one. Disney reported its strongest upfront ever, with 40% of $9 billion in advertising commitments going to streaming and digital. So I think they get ads on Hulu and ESPN Plus. Disney doesn't fully own Hulu, but they own most of the shares. They own a controlling stake. And ESPN, of course, is a subsidiary of Disney. So looks like they're going to carry over some of their, ad strategies over to Disney Plus. Now, I was listening to a Valiant Renegade on YouTube, and he thinks that this is actually a good thing to, hopefully improve the content on Disney Plus. Whether it's woke, political, whether it's damaging established brands like Star Wars or Marvel. There's a lot of the whole fandom minutes and fellowship of fans who just outright protest really the destruction of classic IPs that have been going on. The Valiant Renegade thinks that adding advertising ads will actually improve the content because there'll be a more third-party public, information on what brings in the viewers, what the viewers actually support. And if there's information on what the viewers watch, then that's going to, entice advertisers to advertise on one program or another. So it's going to, act to improve the content. So that's good development. In other Disney news, there's another streaming platform that's in the works, and that's run by the Daily Wire. Conservative media company The Daily Wire continues to grow its kids' entertainment branch by appointing daytime Emmy-winning showrunner of Rapunzel's Tangled Adventure, Chris Sonnenberg, as a senior vice president of animation development and production. He's a former Disney showrunner appointed to a VP role at The Daily Wire. Sonnenberg has a decades-long career working in animation for companies including Disney, DreamWorks, and Fox, among others. He recently was showrunner of Rapunzel's Tangled Adventure, which he developed alongside Shane Prigmore. Other animation department credits include Kung Fu Panda, Futurama, The Critic, and a load of 1990s and 2000s Disney features. In his new role, Sonnenberg will oversee a team of writers and artists, which includes Eric Branscombe of VeggieTales in the House, COVID Restrictions Ruined Couples Night Out, and Ethan Nicole from Axe Cop and Teen Titans Go. So a lot of, animation veterans with some really good resumes are joining the Daily Wire. So it makes me wonder, how does the Daily Wire have so much capital? Do they have investors on Wall Street? Or are they creating content that, the public really supports? Are they actually, turning such a massive profit? They have enough money to put into other things like, scripted entertainment. the Terror on the Prairie movie, which brought in Gina Carano. Jeremy's Razors, that razor company that they launched. Daily Wire is just killing it, and we see that a lot of conservative news outlets are growing and becoming successful. So it looks like there's really no true liberal media outlet because a lot of them are just phony liberals like the mainstream media and sites like Vox and Salon and Huffington Post. But if you're an honest liberal, you ought to take a closer look at the conservative media. So because they're going to be more upfront with you. Moving on. Oh yes, Top Gun Maverick sails past Titanic at the all-time domestic box office, raking in $662 million. It's probably even more by now because this article is a week old. This is from August 9th. Top Gun Maverick doesn't have any woke politics in it. It doesn't have any political agenda one way or another. And the audiences are rewarding the movie for that. Whether political, content or messaging is good or bad, it really depends on the quality of the script, of the writing, of the storytelling. A lot of so-called woke entertainment that audiences are rejecting, it's just really bad content that's using politics as a smokescreen. Politics do have a place in entertainment. It's just gotta, they just have to offer their messaging in an appealing way, in a way that doesn't, preach or talk down to the audience. Let's kind of in on it. You see classic shows like the original Star Trek, the original series. That had political messaging, but it was much better written than the crap that we see today with Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard. So you got to compare the old with the new. And Top Gun Maverick is kind of a throwback to the classic old method of Hollywood storytelling, and audiences are jumping on it. That's why the reason why it's doing so well is because all the other stuff in the theaters is just trash. Top Gun Maverick has overtaken Titanic to become the 7th highest grossing movie of all time in U.S. theaters. The sequel to the 1986 classic has earned more than $662 million in the U.S. since its release, according to data from IMDb's Box Office Mojo, while globally it has raked in over $1.35 billion. Those feats have now seen the movie overtake Titanic in Box Office Mojo's ranking of movies' all-time domestic box office earnings, with the latter earning more than $659 million in U.S. ticket sales since its release in 1997. So here's the rankings. Looks like Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens is the all-time champ, which surprised me because I thought it would be Avengers Endgame, but that's number 2. Spider-Man No Way Home, that's another movie that didn't bother with the woke politics, and the audiences rewarded it. Avatar, which was kind of an anomaly back in 2009. Black Panther. Black Panther was an example of quality writing promoting a political message. It appealed to people of all races and genders, but it did, have a message of, respecting African culture. So, Avengers: Infinity War, Top Gun Maverick, Titanic, Jurassic World, and the Avengers. So, a lot of these that are, not overly political, but gently political. That's what people want. They don't want ham-fisted, campy acting. They want quality. So, Maverick has been widely credited for saving the box office in the pandemic era and has seen movie theaters forced to close. The release of blockbuster titles, including Top Gun Maverick, the Top Gun sequel itself, delayed and a massive shift towards streaming at home. So, I might have to reconsider my vow not to go to the movie theaters ever again because it's going to take time, but it looks like quality content is going to come back. Now, it does take usually between 2 and maybe 4 or 5 years for a movie to be from the time it's greenlit to when it's finally released. It actually takes a few years. So now that projects that are in the works now, we're not going to see them for another 2 or 3 or 4 years. So it's going to take time for quality content to come back to theaters and to come back to television. But the tide is turning. I like to use the word pendulum because that presumes that liberals and conservatives are two sides of a coin. No, they're the whole coin. And the problem is the pendulum gets covered in grime. So consider that. Now, when it comes to streaming, the streaming wars are driving a return back to internet piracy. This is from torrentfreak.com. Netflix piracy thrives as subscribers rethink their streaming subscriptions. Despite the availability of more legal streaming options than ever before, TV show and movie piracy are on the rise. Increased fragmentation in the streaming landscape, paired with high costs, is driving people to illegal options. According to data from piracy tracking company Muso, Netflix content is now good for 16% of all piracy traffic. Millions of subscribers switched from casually consuming pirated content on unlicensed platforms in favor of a convenient and reasonably priced legal alternative. Piracy never went away, but downloading Netflix content illegally seemed silly. In the years that followed, the legal streaming landscape became more crowded. Inspired by Netflix's success, new streaming portals such as Amazon, Disney Plus, HBO Max, Hulu, Paramount Plus, and Peacock started competing for a share of the lucrative streaming market. The media often refers to this competition as the streaming wars, but the real threat may not come from legal streaming services, but illegal pirate sites. Piracy tracking firm Muso recognized the problem too. In addition to doing anti-piracy work for major copyright holders, the UK company also helps major players such as Amazon, Lionsgate, and Sony to understand the latest piracy trends. Faced with an increasingly fractured streaming landscape, the consumer does the math and realizing that having access to all the shows they want to watch is not a justifiable expense when their grocery bill has doubled and they're cycling or carpooling to save money on fuel, says Andy Chatterley, the Muso CEO. In the absence of a one-stop shop like Spotify is to music lovers, and now the piracy sites have evolved to become sophisticated, easy-to-use experiences, people who have never resorted to piracy before are finding it more appealing than ever. Everything you could ever want to watch, all in one place, only a few clicks away, and all for free. What's not to like? Yeah, one of the whole reasons, streaming became a thing was cable became too expensive. The cable companies pretty much had monopolies in each of their regions. So they they put down competition and they committed price gouging for all their content. Netflix was only $8 or $9 or $10 a month, just a fraction of the price of a cable subscription. So it just seemed like a no-brainer. But now with all the different competitors with their own similar price costs, people have to pick and choose which content they want to see, or just forego it altogether. So this is why it's not tenable to really expect one. That's why it's not really feasible to have so many streaming platforms. There's going to be some that collapse, and that might be part of the reason why Discovery and Warner Brothers, they want to go back to the old theater and TV licensing model. So, they do have some very successful streaming platforms. Discovery Plus and HBO Max are doing pretty good, but we're going to see how committed they are to those platforms in the future. Instead of pointing a finger at pirates, Chatterley focuses more on the shortcomings of the TV and movie industry. Piracy can be lowered by offering a one-stop solution for a fair price, but somehow that seems like a pipe dream. Content providers investing billions in their platforms and determined to keep their shows exclusive to them, this seems fanciful. So the drop-off in subscribers seems set to continue, with piracy sites continuing to welcome them with open arms, Cheverly concludes. So we're going to see which streaming platforms survive and which studios go back to just licensing their content to other platforms. That might be the best way to go. Just have some, have some streaming services, serve a wider range of content. I think Disney might be in a better position to maintain their streaming service because they don't rely on just content. They have their theme parks and all their merchandising products to fall back on. So they got money coming in. They've got their Wall Street investors. They've got enough. Even though the company's severely in debt after buying things like Fox and other properties, they still got enough cash flow to support other things. So I think Disney Plus is going to stick around for a while. I think Amazon's going to stick around for a while, with or without the success of Rings of Power. But only a few streaming services are going to survive. And in the meantime, you've got platforms like YouTube and Rumble and Odyssey and Library giving you content not from Hollywood, but from regular folks like me. So before we move on to the final stretch of our live stream, let me tell you about another way you can support the program and support yourself. And that's by clicking on the affiliate link to Uphold. Uphold is a very, user-friendly, cryptocurrency exchange. And you can not just buy crypto, but you can also buy equities in publicly traded companies and also precious metals like gold and silver and platinum. So you hook up Uphold to your bank account and you can decide how much money you want to invest in one asset or another. You don't have to think too hard about it. And Uphold will never lend out your money. One of the reasons we had, the crypto crash of this year was a lot of other exchanges were lending their users money to other investors, whether through trading with leverage and things like that. It's a very risky practice, and it's really easy to be liquidated. Uphold doesn't do that. It doesn't risk your own money. It's fully reserved. So take advantage of Bitcoin and gold and silver, and click on the link to Uphold, and you'll be helping my program as well. So do yourself a favor. So let's move on to cryptocurrency, blockchain, and Bitcoin news, because there's really some hopeful things, some very positive things going on. We talked about, the streaming wars. The internet has basically gutted the music industry, and Hollywood really needs to pay attention to what's happening in the music industry, because that really can predict Hollywood's future. So let's look at this article from Cointelegraph. Turning up the volume, blockchain projects aim to disrupt the music industry. From letting fans co-own their favorite artists' music to providing fair earnings for musicians, projects are using blockchain to change the music industry. Over the last 10 years, the music industry has changed drastically because of the internet and social media development. Artists have new mediums to share their songs, and fans have many new ways to engage with and support their favorite musicians. However, like most things in the Web 2 sphere, Web 2 being like the internet era of social media, a select few own the assets in the industry, and large corporations profit more than the users and artists. While they're still in their very early stages, some blockchain projects are trying to take a shot at changing the industry from within. Tune.fm, a platform powered by Hedera Hashgraph, aims to be able to give musicians 90% of music streaming revenue, which is approximately 10 times more than the stream earnings on mainstream services like Spotify. Artists can earn digital tokens every time their music is streamed within the platform. In an announcement, Andrew Antar, the co-founder of Tune.fm, pointed out that many independent musicians suffered in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. With the likes of Spotify not paying them fairly, many were struggling to get by. We are the antidote for the millions of creatives that are not being paid fairly by the big streaming services, Antar said. Another thing is allowing fans to co-own songs. Andreessen Horowitz backed music marketplace Royal. Royal is a website. It continues to let fans have shared ownerships of songs from their favorite artists through non-fungible tokens, NFTs. After dropping NFTs for prominent rapper Nas, the platform recently released tokens for American DJ and songwriter Diplo. Powering music collaboration through NFTs. A project called Squad of Nights lets its NFT owners form 6-person squads, with each person assigned their own roles in the music production process. Unlike working with traditional music labels, the platform lets community members own 100% of the music they produce. So letting artists basically be their own boss and making their own content. That's a very powerful development. So there's lots of opportunities for artists and creatives to succeed in the internet age. You just have to be open to it. And one thing they can do is utilize a few of the web platforms I'm going to show you here. One is Library, LBRY, and it's connected to Odyssey. So if you're watching this, if you're watching this live stream on Odyssey, you already know about Library. But Library is just a program you can download to your computer and then use that to upload content, whether it's video or maybe books or a blog article. And then you don't have to rely on any like third-party or corporate server to host your content. You can do it from your computer and distribute it out through around the world through the library's network. So you can basically be your own library and distribute it out to anyone anywhere in the world. Then there's Theta. Now I want to stream on Theta as well as Odyssey and Rumble and YouTube, but it doesn't quite like StreamYard's interface. Like there's an error with it. But Theta is a decentralized blockchain-based, streaming platform. So you can do video game streams or live streams like this, where you go over the news, and people will pay you in the Theta cryptocurrency token. Then there's something I just found out. I just saw this advertised on YouTube. It's film.gala.com. I'm just waiting for the page to load. It looks like another blockchain-based content service where rewarding parts of play. By operating a node, you can contribute to our decentralized ecosystem and change the world of entertainment forever, is what they're saying here. So this looks like it's brand new. So maybe wait a while before you invest in it or take part in it. But if you run a node on your computer, you can support a decentralized network of content creators. So that's when you can get in on, and not just entertainment, but media like news and editorial content. So it's a really exciting time for media content and content creators and artists. And it's all thanks to blockchain technology. Do I want to read this article? We're closing in on the end, and I am going to talk about what Jesus says about facing corruption. But I just want to note that the world's largest asset manager, BlackRock, launches a spot Bitcoin private trust. So a lot of big whale institution money is going to come into Bitcoin. So think that's something to consider. That's something to keep an eye on. Maybe not right away, but. And this is not financial advice. This is just what I'm doing. Put in a little bit of your, I'm putting a little bit of my income from every paycheck into Bitcoin and just dollar cost averaging. putting your money in assets is one of the best ways to fight inflation. Just an asset like precious metals, like Bitcoin, like stocks on Wall Street. Those things, either maintain or grow in value while your fiat money decreases in value. So that's one of the best things you can do to preserve your wealth. That's how the rich become rich. They work for assets, not money. So one of the best things you can do for yourself is invest just a little bit at a time and preserve your wealth. Now these last two articles I'm going to share tonight, I'm going to read in full because they're full of good, they're full of good advice on what to do to face, all the crap in the world. This is from Bitcoin Magazine. Bitcoin will lead us to a more virtuous world. This is by Phil Snyder, a video director and editor and a contributor to Bitcoin Magazine. He says, conventional wisdom among Bitcoiners is that Bitcoin will one day assume the throne of worldwide value asset supremacy, whether by force as a juggernaut, by default because universal fiat failure, fiat money being the dollar, or somehow in between is yet to be determined. Regardless of how this happens, what does this revolution mean for Bitcoiners? Because of popular generations that Bitcoin fixes this and fix the money, fix the world, many of us expect that after the transition to hyper-Bitcoinization, wars will cease and there will be peace and wealth will vastly increase. The risk of putting too much stock in any over-Pollyannish outlook is that it doesn't consider the innate corruption of human beings. The entire human race is born self-centered, and only through spiritual regeneration can we hope for a change in the status quo. In other words, the only way the world will genuinely improve is when the hearts of the people in the world change. If you presume that great wealth changes people's hearts for the better, well, good luck with that when you lose your life savings on the next shitcoin rug pull. There's something mysteriously wonderful, powerful, and unique going on with Bitcoin. There's a dynamic spiritual side to the movement. So much evil of the world's current system is stopped in its tracks because of this resilient, rules-based protocol. One of the surprising benefits of Bitcoin is that anyone who wishes to profit from it must obey the rules, and the rules are based on natural law, as enshrined by Austrian economics, which is justice, compassion, and goodness in its highest sense. These are spiritual values and virtues. Natural law, also called the law of nature, is mentioned and invoked in the Declaration of Independence. Natural law is simply your conscience. It's, human beings intuitively know right from wrong. We don't necessarily know truth from falsehood, but we know right from wrong, what's fair and right, what's fair and just, and what's unfair. And we ought to be able to call out people who openly violate that law, as we're doing now. As incredible as it may sound to a non-Bitcoiner, the protocol actually enforces spiritual virtues. The way in which this is accomplished is ineffable in its complex, multidimensional brilliance. Bitcoiners believe in the protocol because it's truly a righteous system and therefore affects our lives profoundly, and it seems to even have transformational effects on people, both outwardly and inwardly. If this spiritual side effect of Bitcoin is real, as in from God, then perhaps there is hope for the long-term future of Earthlings. The author says, as a Christian, trying to proactively shun the seductive idolatry so contagious with wealth, I'm worried of and worried for those who worship the gift over the giver. I see Bitcoin as sacred and agree with Jimmy Song and many others in the space that it is a gift from God for which we should be wildly thankful. As with anything regarded as sacred, it must be protected at all costs from the profane. There are many examples of this, but the most celebrated and profound example of protection is the block size war. Greedy and unscrupulous types saw to benefit themselves by myopically attempting to hard fork the protocol, but developers, stepping forward as priests and guardians of the sacred, stood steadfast and in the way, and thank God were victorious. Though some of those were notable OGs, it should be clear by now they neither understood Bitcoin nor deserved to have authority over it. They're not to be trusted. Here we are, fleeing the trusted third party, and some of those we thought were brothers have betrayed us. It's precisely the trustless feature of Bitcoin that protects us as we cherish and protect it as sacred. Hopefully, those who attacked Bitcoin will one day be reformed, at least to a reasonable quality of low time preference. Many are finding out that Bitcoin requires discipline for success, and practical and profitable practices of deferred gratification that come with hodling, that's holding on for dear life, and the discipline of a low time preference are surprisingly transformative, especially because the mind is opened and heretofore unexplored, wise alternatives to a whole host of living hells. Sadly, the spirits behind the living hells often speak our language but aren't really with us. It's like the Nazis in Raiders of the Lost Ark, thinking they can open and conduct a holy ritual with the Ark of the Covenant, and look what happened to them. Further, it's like the Grail Knight in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, who challenged Jones to choose wisely. The behind-the-scenes trivia is that the original script called for the knight to battle Jones over the Grail, but it was rewritten that he would stage a challenge of wit, wisdom, and virtue. Seems like an apt metaphor. Hyper-Bitcoinization is the outcome we seek in this revolution, but rare is the successful revolution whose new regime is kinder, gentler, and more just than the one it replaces. If Bitcoiners do become a new world economic elite, what will prevent us from becoming just as unscrupulous as the scoundrels we replace? The short answer? God knows. The longer answer is we must be intentional about taking on the mantle of serving humanity that Bitcoin enjoins. We can see examples of this in the community already. Without naming names, there are many giving up the comforts of home and wealth to travel to developing nations to educate and empower through Bitcoin while contributing to the development of the local infrastructure. This is the work of love, the ultimate virtue. It's a fruit of the spirit, and most important of all, of Bitcoin's outcomes and Bitcoiners' efforts. So the world is corrupt. We all have some capacity for corruption within us, no matter who we are, some more than others. But one of the biggest themes of the Bible is that God actually can fix what's wrong with us. And we become, his instruments in repairing a broken world. So that's why I want to end with a little gospel, analysis here. What did Jesus say about dealing with corruption, abuse, and conflicts in our churches? And not just churches, but also organizations like the government and corporations. This is from follow the teachings of Jesus.com. It looks like a Christian blog. And I highlighted the parts I want to read. We live in an imperfect world, and inevitably, some people may be prepared to act dishonestly to get attractive things. So all human organizations will experience corruption at some time. Businesses, political parties, government departments, schools, universities, police, armed services, and of course, churches will all experience corruption at some time. Despite corruption being inevitable, it is generally regarded as shameful or criminal. Unfortunately, when corruption is discovered, often the first reaction of people inside an organization is to try to conceal it. Their reason for concealing it, usually, is that if the corruption becomes known, people will lose confidence in the organization. But when the corruption and concealment become known, the concealment will make it more likely that people will lose confidence in the organization. We know that all organizations experience corruption at some time, so people won't be surprised to hear that corruption has happened. And they may be interested to hear how the organization responds to corruption when it happens. What we need is a culture in which we recognize that when corruption happens, it is in everyone's best interest to ensure that it is not concealed, but managed in the best interests of all people who have an interest in the organization, as far as that is possible. Christian organizations are certainly not immune from corruption, and it's important to remember that corruption is not just about money. Corruption is acting dishonestly in return for money or personal gain. Personal gain includes gaining power over others. It includes trying to get your own way. It includes all forms of abuse, including sexual abuse, domestic violence, emotional abuse, and bullying. What should we as Christians do when these things happen in our communities? Well, what did Jesus say we should do? Jesus said, if another member of the church sins against you, go out and point the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you are not listened to, take one or two others along with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of two or three witnesses. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. This is from Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 through 17. The author of this article says, I know how difficult it is to talk to an abuser from personal experience. I know it can be very, very difficult for the victim of abuse to talk to their abuser about the abuse. It's particularly difficult when the abuser has a power and or authority within a community or organization. I think this is one of the reasons why Jesus taught his followers to be servants of each other and not to hold positions of authority over each other. But Jesus tells us to do this just once. If the abuser refuses to listen, Jesus tells us to get support from others. It's difficult, but this is what Jesus tells us to do. And if we're doing what Jesus wants us to do, he will give us the strength to do it. So I think the purpose of this advice is give the offender, give the abuser a chance to do what's right, to come around and repent and do the right thing. If they refuse to do that, that's when you go outside and you get the support of others. So that's what we're seeing a lot in this battle against corruption in our time in the U.S. government and really governments all around the world. We have to follow the law because we want to give the abusers, the chance to do the right thing and come back into, the social contract. Someone probably, talk to the abusers and the corrupt in person alone, and when they went about their corruption, went about their abuse, that's when the ball started rolling, and all the scandals that have been exposed the last 2 years, that's when things got rolling. So I want to leave you with that here. I'm going to check with see if I have any comments or chats. Doesn't look like it, but that's cool. This program will still be up after I'm done streaming, so you can comment. You can make a comment in the section below and share it with your friends and family, but I'm going to leave you at that here. As I always say, things are looking bad. They're looking worse and worse, but they only look worse because it's getting exposed. The dark forces, the evil forces in this world are getting desperate because they're actually losing the grip on the people. So stay strong, stay patient, learn to endure. If you're having trouble financially, talk to people in your community and work something out. Find people who have money to invest. Invest in your business, invest in your in your side hustle, and work out ways to treat each other fairly. Don't necessarily. You can go outside. You don't have to follow the rules of the elites. You don't have to follow the rules of what the corporations and your employers tell you. You can still act fairly and still endure the recession until we actually get some honest, true public servants into office. So with that, I'll let you go. I'm Ian Houseman, letting you know that it's okay to stand up for yourself. Have a good one.